Awesome. All right, I'm Paige, I'm an alcoholic, and yeah, we're technically on page 65. But before we dive into it, I'm going to do just a little bit of review. I know everyone's like, oh, I just can't wait to get here for a review. It's the most exciting. But it's helpful to just see what we've done and to do a review of what we've done so far. So we're diving into the fourth step, and the first thing that I need to do before I start on any fourth step is I need a notebook and I need a pen. And what if, it's better to get a larger size notebook, like A4 size. And this one, for example, is 80 pages. 80 might not be enough pages for how I like to format the page. I like to do one per page. So we're not the most tree friendly, but it's going to give you a lot of room to work and a lot of room to write. And one of my little tricks is make sure you get a pen that you like writing with. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy, but don't get one that you're just scribbling on your envelopes to get it to work, because that's just going to make it more difficult. Now, before we do anything in our inventory, we always want to start with a prayer. And you can use whatever prayer that you want to use, whether it's the set-aside prayer, the third step prayer, or one of the things that I like to do is I like to, just say a prayer from my heart. Something like, God, I pray that you would guide my heart, guide my mind, guide my pen. Help me to write this inventory. May I see that which you need me to see. And something like that, right? And then what we're going to do, the very first action we're going to take on our fourth step is we're going to draw some lines. Now, if how I'm formatting it is a little different than how you've done it before, you're right, I'm wrong, but look at all the space we've got on this piece of paper. Ooh, So how I format the page is I do one line horizontally. Yep, horizontally. I forgot which way was horizontally and which way was vertically, despite spending much of my alcoholism in the horizontal position. So one line horizontally, about halfway across the page, and then two lines going vertically from that. So one line across, two lines up. And what that does is at the top half of the page, it creates three columns and one big old column right at the bottom of the page. So, and then flip the page, one line across and two lines up from that horizontal. Flip the page, one line across, two lines up from that horizontal. And I do that on 50 to 100 pages. And I want you to know there is spiritual value in drawing the lines, because so often many of us are, not you guys are always brave, but so many of us are scared to get into that fourth step. We're afraid of we're just afraid of the process. Well, now I know AA, but I'm going to make that same joke. We weren't afraid of lines before. You know what I mean? Lines, it's a pretty easy way to get into the book. And it gets us moving in it. It gets us some momentum with it. And then once we've got all those lines done, what we're going to do is we are going to begin to get into resentments. Now, I'm just going to share the screen and show you sort of what the columns look like. Oh, actually, hold on. I'll do it with me in the corner. Hold on. Nobody puts baby in the corner, but I can go there. It's no problem. Alrighty. Just so you have that like sort of visual engagement as well. So a resentment, the word resent, it's French in origin, and what we're talking about is a refeeling of a negative emotion. And as we dive into our fourth step, we're going to do only one column at a time. So who goes in column one? Column one is just a person, an institution, or a principle. And the biggest thing is if we started the inventory process with a prayer, which is always advised, that means I've asked God or my higher power, the creator, the spirit of the universe to direct my thinking. And the biggest thing is do not self-edit. If a name comes to mind, write it down. Just write it down. There is no harm in writing it down. It'll be 10 more minutes out of your life, gaining experience with a process that we're going to use the rest of our life. But there may be harm in leaving it off. So what it typically looks like is, from my experience, is what I will do. So I'll take my notebook, and in the first column 1, I will write mom, and then I will flip the page, and then I will write dad, and I will flip the page, and I will write the X, and I will flip the page, and I will write the other X. So it's only going to be 1 per page. And so people is pretty simple. Mom, dad, the X, our coworkers, our boss, our employees, the people in the meeting. Oh, Paige doing the big book study. Write it down. Family members, if we have kids, write them down. If you got pets, write them down. Do not self-edit. And then institutions can be things like AA. It could be your rehab treatment center. It could be a company that you work for. It could be the mental health system, the health system, the legal system. These institutions. It can be companies. It could be the police. It could be the treatment center industry. It could be a certain home group or a certain big book study. Feel free to resent this one. Now, principles. Principles can be things like God. If I have a God resentment, this is where I want to put it down. So I write God and I flip the page. I can resent certain religions or certain religious practices. So if I resent organized religion, I write it down. If I resent racism or sexism, write it down. If I resent a political party, write it down. If I resent more nebulous concepts, like if I resent writing inventory, I write inventory, flip the page. If I resent that I've got to work with others, flip the page. If I resent that I've got to be honest, I've got to make amends, things like that, write it down, flip the page. And you can always look up online step 4 resentment prompt, and it will list a number of things that I can resent. Different people, like from co-workers to in-laws to judges to lawyers to doctors to the whole spectrum of people to various institutions, and then principles. And I find the principles can be a little, on the most commonly searched one, can be a little lacking. So that's why I always like to look at things like we can resent the promises, we can resent hope, we can resent, there's so much that we can resent. If it comes to mind, write it down. There's a gentleman who was taking me to an in-person meeting, and we were talking about Canada geese, which is a very aggressive form of goose, a very angry waterfowl, and he was resentful, and I was serious, but I was joking in the sense of there's value in taking things like that through the columns. If your coffee shop always gets your order wrong, take it through the columns. There is value in it. So I put it down: name, flip the page, name, flip the page, name, flip the page. And then when I get a sense that I've kind of, okay, that feels like that's it, I go back to the very start of the book and I go to column 2. Now, column 2 is, why am I angry? Why do I have this resentment? Another way to say it is, what does this big stupid jerk do? They suck, and here's why. And the biggest thing with this is to do it point form. We don't need, nor do we want to get into the story. We just want to point form, why am I angry? So if I resent mom, I don't need to get into every single time she forgot me from soccer practice. I can just write, wasn't the mom I needed her to be. And we can also be petty. Be as petty as you really are. Don't try to pretend to be spiritual in column 2. This is where you got to use all the swear words you want. Do it in column 2. Call them the bad name, but use point form. So, for example, if I'm resentful at having to write inventory, why am I angry? It takes time. It's a lot of work. I don't like doing it. Great, flip the page. Then I'm resentful at God. Why am I resentful at God? My life hasn't turned out how I wanted it to. I'm an alcoholic. I don't know if God likes me. Flip the page. If I'm resentful at organized religion, maybe I have childhood trauma. Controlling, prejudiced, and then flip the page, right? Point form, flip the page. And then because here's the thing, in my experience, when I work with sponsees, I sit with them as they do their 4th step. So they're not writing alone. And when I sit with them, we can get columns 1, 2, and 3 done in about an hour or two, totally done. And there's real value in that. I know a lot of people don't sit with people when they do their 4-step. I like to for a number of reasons. The first is because it's effective. I do things that are effective because I don't have a lot of time, and that is an effective use of my time. The other reason I do it is because if you've ever sat before a 4-step, you got the pen and paper in front of you and you don't know how to start and you don't know if you're doing it right. And I know that nobody here would ever fall into overthinking and overcomplicating it. Not you guys, but somebody like me, I'll overthink and overcomplicate and I'll get stuck in analysis paralysis. And it just helps to have somebody say, write it down, flip the page, write it down, flip the page. And so when I've got column 2 done, why am I angry for each and every resentment? I go back to the front of the book and I write column 3. And column 3 comes from the very top of page 65. And I write, if this resentment affected my self-esteem, I simply write the word self, or the words self-esteem. And self-esteem is how I feel about myself. If this resentment, this situation made me feel worse about myself, made me feel unlovable or unworthy, or, made me hate myself, I write it down. Then I look at ambition. Does it affect my ambition? And if it affects my ambition, I just write ambition. And what does ambition mean? Ambition means my desire to go and do things in the future. Maybe there is somebody that, not you guys would never, but maybe I did a share at a meeting and somebody was cross-talking. And then that hurt my feelings. And I'm like, I'm never doing that again. Or take a service position. You go to make coffee and somebody already made it. Now, not that we would get offended by that, but I'm never doing that again, right? Does it affect my desire to go and do things in the future? And if it does, I just write ambition. There are a lot of people who do extended third columns, and there's absolute value in that. But I think what I'm trying to do in my experience is I just want to see the depth of the resentment, and the real freedom for me comes in the 4th column. So we then look at security. And there's 3 different types of security that can be affected: physical security, emotional security, and financial security. So if a resentment affected my physical security, that could be one where I was physically hurt, physically threatened, or physically felt unsafe. Maybe I resented alcoholism. That's a principle I can resent. Well, alcoholism sure did a number on my physical security, so I can write it down. And then emotional security is, did I feel emotionally hurt or threatened? Was I emotionally abused? I can write that down, emotional security. And then financial security. Did it affect my money? Did they steal from me, my money, my things? Did they take a job opportunity? Did it affect work? If so, write financial security. And then we look at personal relations and sex relations. So did this situation or did this resentment affect my relationships with platonic people? Platonic or the non-romantic. Just my regular homies. Did it affect my relationships with friends, family, coworkers, acquaintances, with people at the meeting? If so, I can write personal relations. And then sex relations. Now, sex relations is my romantic or sexual connections. And so did it affect it? Now, keep in mind, I don't need to have had a romantic relationship with the resentment for it to affect my sex relations. For example, if I have a boss that is pressuring me to work overtime and I have a partner that's feeling neglected, my resentment towards my boss would affect my sex relations. And the biggest thing that I always say for column 3 is that if it feels true for you, it's true. If you can feel like, yeah, that feels like that affects my emotional security, write it down. If it feels like it affects your physical security, maybe you drank over it and fell down the stairs, write it down. If it's true for you, it's true. I'm just trying to see the depth of the resentment, to see the need that I have to be free of it. Because this one person or institution or principle is affecting all these areas of my life. And if it continues, man, I'm not going to be okay. And so now now that we've done that was very quick review. Some of you are like, it was not quick, but that was review. So now let's skip over the example. We're going to come back to the example, but for right now, let's skip over it and go to the very bottom of 65. So once we've done all of column 1, and then we do all of column 2, and then we do all of column 3, that brings us to this point. So it says, we went back through our lives, not just my drinking career, my whole life. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. What is being asked of me is to be thorough and to be honest. Again, if it comes to mind, write it down. Don't self-edit. When we were finished, so when we're finished the first 3 columns and doing one column at a time, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. And that makes sense because column 1 is the jerk, the column 2 is their jerky behavior, and column 3 is how their jerkiness affected me. So it makes sense at this point. I would be like, why, yes, people were often quite wrong. And it says to conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. Most of us have never, up until this point in our life, really approached a 4th column sort of mindset, which is to say, looking for where I was the big jerk. So, and here is the result of not doing this. It says the usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. There is no freedom in them being the jerk. There's no freedom in it. There is no worries. We're on page 66, very first paragraph. No need to be sorry. There is no freedom in that. The only freedom is in me realizing that I was wrong. Because, I mean, if they're the jerk, there's nothing I can do about it. And then people continue to hurt me and I stay hurt. I can't live that way. So it says, sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. Does that sound a little familiar when we're talking about the 3rd step? You know, Paige being the actor, trying to run and control and direct. And the more I do it, the worse it gets. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. You see, I might win the war, but at what cost? You know what I mean? You know when you ever won an argument and you're still like ruminating and you still feel that like heightened adrenaline and still, but you know you won, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Here's my experience. I need to win, but I also need everyone in the world to agree with me about my correctness. Do you know what I mean? That's all I need to be satisfied. I don't think it's unreasonable. I'm not asking too much. No. And it goes on to say, so what we're saying is it does not work. Living in those columns does not work. I need freedom from that. So it says it is plain that a life, and I want to emphasize this is any life. This is what is promised to any human being who holds on to and lives and harbors resentment, any human being. So it says it is plain that a life, any life, which includes deep resentment, leads only to futility and unhappiness. The futility is that sort of, what's the point? You know, it's not working. Life isn't working. And the unhappiness is that misery that was all over, like I was drowning in misery by the time I got here. To the precise extent that we permit these, that we allow ourselves to hold on to these resentments, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. We waste the precious life that we've been given. And we all know people who are not alcoholic, who are deeply, deeply resentful people. And you can tell that it has wasted their life, wasted their energy, wasted relationships. We can see, not in ourselves usually, but in other people, people that are deeply, deeply miserable. and holding on to resentments. And for any human being on earth to hold on to resentment, that is the only possible outcome. Futility, unhappiness, misery, that is the outcome of any resentment. But we aren't just regular people. We are and. So that's best case scenario. But what is promised to us as an alcoholic is this. It says, but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. I want to point something out. Maintenance and growth. Often we talk about 10, 11, 12 as the maintenance steps, but I promise you there is growth when I'm really doing this thing. Maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. I can't stay well on one drink. And if you're hanging out with me on a Wednesday, you're not able to stay well on one drink either. And here's the thing. I can't stay well on one spiritual experience. I need to continue to seek and to have spiritual experiences. That's what I need. But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. What that means is it is infinitely fatal. For normal people, it ruins their life. For somebody like me, it is fatal. Fatal. And if you're like, girl, are you sure that is what that means? Hold on. It says, we found that it is fatal. Fatal, And it's saying the same thing a number of ways to try to smash home this point. I don't have the luxury of holding on to resentments. So, for when harboring such feelings, and this is how it is fatal, it's not only threatening us with the fatality, it is explaining how it is fatal. So, for when harboring such feelings, when holding on to these feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the capital S Spirit. I cannot feel serenity and resentment at the same time. I cannot be pissed off about things not going my way and feel the presence of God at the same time. Maybe y'all are more spiritual than me, but I can't. I gotta be free of these things. So it says, so we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And when I am in that place of disconnect from God, what inevitably happens? It says the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And you can make a note that the insanity of alcohol returning is the obsession of the mind. You see, in Alcoholics Anonymous, what we are treating is a spiritual malady. And when the spiritual malady is overcome, the mental obsession is relieved. And if the mental obsession is removed from me, I don't drink. And if I don't drink, I don't set off the allergy. But if I stop taking the course of action that allows me to live in this state of grace, I'm going to be disconnected. And the mental obsession will return. And the mental obsession is a promise that I will drink again. And so it says, and with us to drink is to die. And I'm going to point something out just from my experience, because there's a gentleman that I know in the city that I live, and he is in a lot of pain, and he is not a happy man right now. And he's like, I can find all these contradictions in the book, and he's relapsed and struggled, and he's like, I relapsed and I didn't die. But it's a reminder that there are more than one type of death. There's more than one type of death, and I will experience many types of death before I take my last breath for me to drink again. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. With us to drink is to die, and there is many types of death. And so it says, if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. And I'm going to point something out. Just as much as I need to be free of anger in the 4th step, is as much as I need to be free of anger in the 10th step. And so the biggest thing is to call a spade a spade. Sometimes in AA we hear things like, you gotta honor your feelings. And I am like, I don't know what the frick that means. But here's what I take from it. To honor my feelings is to be honest about what it really is. It is a resentment, and then take the course of action. There's a lot of times I work with a lot of people or people I'm not working with, and they're bringing me something. I'm like, let's take it through the columns, or I need you to take it through the columns. And the reason is not a dismissal of the pain or the suffering that they're in. It is an acknowledgement, because for us, we don't have the luxury of holding on to a resentment. I have to be free of it. And this is the way I know to get free of it. So whether we're approaching our fourth step, or we've been doing this forever and we're just like, oh, inventory, it behooves me. I'm wearing the sweater today. Regardless, I need to be free of it. So it says, if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. So grouch is to be that irritable person. Now brainstorm, in the 1930s, it had a different definition. So we're not talking about the overthinking, although I will say many of us have suffered from analysis paralysis. I have a sponsee who talks about that his problem is not that he thinks too little, it is that he acts too little. I cannot overcome my thinking with my thinking. I can only be free of it with my action. But in the 1930s, the word brainstorm was actually in reference to a sudden explosion of anger. Not that anyone here would ever do that, especially to your spouse about leaving the socks on the bed or whatever. But like, that's what we're talking about. So I got to be free of my grouchiness. I got to be free of those outbursts of anger. I've got to be free of it. It says they may be the dubious luxury of normal men. Normal non-alcoholic people might be able to sip from their resentment cup and enjoy it and feel, because, you can get a lot done on a good resentment. You know what I mean? You get a little burst of FU energy, and they can enjoy it. But somebody like me, it is fatal. It is fatal. And it says, but for us, these things are poison. And a resentment, as I'm sure many of us have heard the expression, a resentment is like drinking poison and expecting another person to die. And some of us know that intimately. Not you guys here, but nobody here would ever drink at somebody, hey? F you, that'll show you, I'll get drunk. Nobody here has ever done that. Yeah, we have, right? And that's I'll show you, I'll ruin my life. That'll teach you a lesson. Like, that's what I'm doing, right? And it says, we turned back to the list, for it held the key to the future. So what we've written down in columns 1, 2, 3 begins the key to the future. A radically new and a radically different life comes from this moment. It says we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. So we're not doing the 360 because that's a full loop-de-doop. We're doing a 180. We're going to see this from an absolute 180 degrees. We began to see that this world and its people really dominated us. As we see that in column 3, this resentment to the person who shares too long at the home group, or this person who drives like a jerk, or you know what I mean? It's ruining every part of my life. It dominates me. The resentment has me. I don't have the resentment. I think, I got a little resentment. No, the resentment's got a whole lot of Paige is what that's got. Like, I'm held by it. And it says we began to see that in that state, the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. And what we will find is that 90%, about 90, if not more, 90% of our resentments are fancied. They are fancied. I set the ball rolling. I made it happen. But I do want to acknowledge that there are times where the harm is real. Especially because as we get into column 4, I'm going to make sure I talk about childhood abuse. But as I go through talking about childhood, before I talk about that, often if we are people who have experienced childhood abuse, and many of us are, we are like, wait a minute, where were my mistakes in that? Where was I? I wasn't selfish in that. I wasn't self-seeking in that. And so I'll just talk about it now. For 90% of our resentments, we're going to be looking at before. Where was I the jerk first? But when it comes to things like childhood abuse, we're going to take a very different angle. With childhood abuse, we're going to go through that lens of, okay, well, did I drink at it? Did I not seek any help for it? If you're a victim of childhood abuse, you might know what it is like to re-victimize yourself with it, right? Did I use it as a reason to harm others or to avoid help, right? And that's where we begin to look at that. We'll have a different sort of lens and a different sort of approach. But I just wanted to say that ahead of time because I know that so often when we get to the fourth column, there's that thought about, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so it's a different angle with that. Yeah, fancied is imagined. I made it up. I'm the sort of human being. It's a beautiful, sunny Wednesday afternoon, and I will think myself into suicidal ideation. Do you know what I mean? I will take a perfectly good day and ruin it, just with what's happening between the ears. So yeah, I need a whole lot of God a whole lot of the time. All the time, to be honest with you guys. So it says, in that state, the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered. I have to get free of them. But how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. And what I want to point out about this is an interesting, I can't get free of resentments on my own. That's what it's saying. I can't do it on my own power. I can't do it. I can't just wish away my resentments. You guys know what it's like when you're working with a sponsee who clearly has a resentment and they pull out a thesaurus because they will find any other word than resentment. No, it's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated, right? Or that like, no, it's fine. It really doesn't bother me anymore. I'm not upset about it at all. I've clearly let it go. I can't overcome them on my own power. And here's what I've found. What I've found is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is not, no worries, we're just glad you're here. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is not this like climbing the corporate ladder of success. What it is an outpouring of more and more of myself to the unconditional love that is God. And if you're like, girl, that sounds fancied. Nuh-uh, it's ineffable. It's an experience. And what I mean by that is I'm coming to my inventory and I've got these resentments. Actually, I have some friends in Atlanta that use the expression, it's eating my lunch. And my lunch has been ate for years, and I can't overcome that on my own power. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let God work in these resentments, and my heart will be radically transformed. That is God's love. So it says, this was our course. So this is how we begin to approach these resentments. It says, we realize that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. See, the spiritual malady is not limited to alcoholics. Though we did not like their symptoms, by the way, is column 2. We didn't like that. And the way these disturbed us, that's column 3. It says, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And you can make a little note that we're going to come back to they, like ourselves, were sick too in column 4. So we're going to come back to that. And then this is what's often known as the resentment prayer. I sometimes call it the page 67 prayer. So in case we can't remember where it is, people can find it. It's on page 67. And says, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Now, I'm just going to make a little note. I'm not praying for them. Bear with me. I'll make a reference to page 552, but on page 67 right here, I'm not praying for them. We ask God to help us show them. I am praying so that I be changed, right? Show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Because I can't do that on my own. I need God's help with it. It goes on to say, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. And this is so, I love the page 67 prayer, the resentment prayer, because it's radical. Because what I would expect is be like, okay, God. Well, actually, what I would first expect is, okay, God, you're going to have to change that guy. He's got to be different. But what I'm doing is I'm saying, change me. And it's even deeper than change me. It is, how can I be helpful to him? What? What? Like, that is radical. How can I help this person that I can't stand? How can I be helpful to them? And then it says, God, save me, because God is going to do it. God does the heavy lifting. I take some actions I don't want to take. I take some prayers I don't want to pray. You know what I mean? Yeah, the sick man's prayer. That's another word for it, or another expression for it. Absolutely. This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. As if God's will isn't already being done. But I got to ask for it. So I got the delusion of the controller. Like, I'm playing with a controller that's not plugged in. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, the 3.5 prayer, as you would see on the handout. And so here's how I would say it. It would, if I was resentful at somebody named Bob. Nope, we have a Bob. Never mind. Sorry, I was gonna pick a name we didn't have. We got a Bob. My bad. Let's say I was resentful at, well, I don't see a Steve. All right, let's say I was resentful at a Steve. I don't know why that, I got no issues with any of the Steves in my life. They're delightful. But let's say I was resentful at Steve. I would say, and this is how I do it, God, help me to show Steve the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Steve is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. That's how I say it. Now, I can do that with other things. So, for example, let's say I resent alcoholism. God, help me to show alcoholism the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Alcoholism is a sick illness. How can I be helpful to those who suffer with it? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And maybe I'm resentful at the line by line, page by, wait. I can't remember the name of the big book study. Line by line, word by word, line by line, page by page, big book study. We'll just say the big book study for the example of the prayer. Let's say I was resentful at this. So what we could be, or what we could say is, God, help me to show the big book study the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. The big book study is a sick study, or the people in it are sick. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. Now, keep in mind, I think in 2025, sometimes the sick has a bit of a judgmental connotation that was not there in the 1930s. What we mean when we say sick is not like, ew, gross, you're sick. Although that was giving me 90s vibes. And 90s vibes, I wanted to be sick. But what I'm talking about is that when we talk about sick person, what we mean is a human being who is operating from pain. Operating from pain. And so what we're going to do is, before we work on any of the fourth columns, we're going to say that prayer for them. So we're going to say the prayer and then get into the fourth column. Say the prayer and then get into the fourth column. We're going to say that for each and every one of our resentments. Now, some of the resentments require what I like to call a little bit of spiritual elbow grease, where we need a little bit of extra softening is what I call it. And there's some actions that we can take. You don't have to, but if you have those resentments that are just, you said the prayer and you did the fourth column and you're still, sometimes we just need some spiritual elbow grease. So the first place we can look for spiritual elbow grease is on page 552. And we can turn there. Yeah. Page 552. And it's just really helpful for the big heavy ones. And the big heavy ones are almost found at the very beginning of the book. And so the stories of a woman who had a resentment towards her mother. One of those kind of big heavy ones, those nagging resentments that we don't know if we can get free of, and it just kind of goes and goes and goes, and it's still there. Or sometimes we have those resentments, we do work on them, they go away, we maybe even make amends, and they pop back up. And that happens. So what do I do? This same process. But page 552, she knew she had to be free of this resentment, otherwise she was going to drink again. And there's a magazine, and it was Liberty magazine, and it was Norman Vincent Peale. It was a Norman Vincent Peale article, unless one of we get the history husbands to correct me. But to my research, that is who I believe that is. And there's this magazine, and it had the word resentment. And she was like, oh, I got one of those. I got a big one of those. And he said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or the thing that you resent, you will be free. I'm doing it so I get free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. And I can pause and I can ask myself, what do I want for myself? Maybe it's happiness. Maybe it's sobriety. Maybe it's a little shallow. Maybe we want a new car. I don't care. Pray for that for them, that they get health, happiness, sobriety, that they get a new car if that's what we want. What do I want for myself? Ask for it for them. And it says, ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. You will be free. And this is how we know that this is for people like us. You know what I mean? This is some alcoholic direction, because it says, even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, because I don't mean it. I don't want it for them. My prayers are just words. It's like, great, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks. And you will find that you will have come to mean it and to want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. It has worked for me then, and it has worked for me many times since, and it will work for me every time I am willing to work it. Sometimes I have to ask first for the willingness, but it too always comes. And that's something that is all over the first 164 pages. If I am struggling with willingness, I can pray for the willingness, and it comes. And it says, and because it works for me, it will work for all of us. As another great man says, the only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing the only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. So doing what you have to because you want to. And if you're like, who's that great guy over there? It was Chuck Chamberlain. That's who that was. Just for those that were curious. And so for some of those big heavy ones, if we've got those big heavy ones, they might require a little bit of that spiritual elbow grease. They might need some page 552. One of the other things that we can do for some of those big heavy ones is we can also do a meditation practice. A loving kindness meditation or a metta meditation can be helpful with some of those big heavy ones. There's also a practice, it's a Hawaiian forgiveness meditation known as Ho'oponopono. And I will not be spelling that in the chat. What I will be doing is voice to texting it on Google and then copying and pasting. If you're like, how do you spell that? That's how I get the spelling. Whole lot of O's, whole lot of N's, and like a little apostrophe in there somewhere. That's the best I got. And there's other ways we can approach it too. When we talk about Emmett Fox, absolutely. Emmett Fox has a beautiful one where it's like saying this prayer, and I don't quite have it in my brain, but it's saying this prayer where we release them fully and completely. We forgive them. And every time they come back to mind, we just turn our thoughts to God and say, another quick prayer. That's another strategy. Other ones that can be helpful is to imagine this person on their deathbed. And imagine that they're afraid and scared and that we're the only person that can offer them comfort in their final moments and how we might feel about them then. Don't pull the plug. I'm just kidding. Another way to do it is also we can imagine them as a small child. Because I've got some trauma around, end of life stuff. So I can't do that one so much anymore. But there's, the imagining them just as like a little toddler. And having those big same emotions that they were having and doing those same things, but imagining them as a toddler and how we might feel about them then. And again, what are we trying to do? Just soften it. With a lot of these, we can just say, and with all of them, we're going to be saying the resentment prayer on page 67. But these can be really helpful ways to just to soften it. And actually, a couple years ago, I was writing some inventory because I was coming up on the 10-year anniversary of my disability, and I could feel that there was a lot of stuff that was going to happen, and so I dove into another set of steps. And I was writing, and I had some time, and so what I was doing is I would do a loving kindness meditation for every single person on the resentments, and I did a Ho'oponopono for every single person, and it was just it was a beautiful experience. What happened after that is I was sitting and listening to one of my spiritual homies that I like to listen to, and she quoted this, I don't know if it was her line or she quoted it from somewhere, but she said the line, "You cannot say you love God if you do not love his children." And I remember feeling, and that inventory was riddled with Paige being judgy pants. It was all about my judgment and how I think people needed to, that's what that inventory was. And I remember feeling that judgment fall from me. So that's what we're after. This power doing for us that which we cannot do for ourselves. So going back to page 67, it says we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. Sick as in hurting, sick as in suffering, sick as in pain, and they're just projecting their pain onto us. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. Again, when I signed that little employment contract in step 3, I agreed that I would be helpful to those around me and to God and to my fellows. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God. God will show us how to take a kindly, tolerant view of each and every one. And that is God's doing. I just got to access that power. So it says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. We're no longer thinking about what they did. All done what they did. We resolutely looked for our own mistakes. So that's what we're doing in the 4th column. And it says, where had we been? And I point this out, and we're going to make a note of it. Oh, thank you for getting the spelling on that one, George. Amazing. He did it from his brain. He didn't have to look it up at all. I'm just, look at y'all. Y'all are getting the spelling. That's delightful. So, it is where had we been, not had we been. So with each and every resentment, I'm going to assume that I had been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid, and I'm going to look for where. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Again, it's not about what they did, it's about what we did. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. Now, I will say, if you're a blue pen person, you can stay sober. Even if you're a pink pen person, if you're blue and white or pink and white, you can stay sober. But I'll be honest with you guys. I'm a black pen sort of gal. I like my black ink. But you can stay sober with different colored ink. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters right. So, that willing to set these matters right, we often see in our 4th column where we actually were the ones that caused harm. And it can often lead us back to where we need to make amends. So I'm just going to share this screen and we're going to have a look. So what I would always recommend is when we get to the 4th column, we don't start at the front of the book. Because the front of the book is going to have like mom and dad, and it's going to have the big, heavy resentments. The best place to start is at the very back of the book. There'll usually be one big heavy resentment in the back. That is usually how that goes, because that's just how it works, just in my experience. And so what we're going to do is we go to the back of the book for column 4 and work our way forward. I like doing that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is I'm starting with these little itty-bitty easy ones, and I start building momentum and I start seeing the patterns. Also, if I need some of the spiritual elbow grease with some of these big heavy ones, it's going to give me time to do that, to practice praying for them. And so we start at the back and move towards the front. So the first thing that we do is we say the prayer. God, help me to show so-and-so the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So-and-so is a sick person. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. Now, the first thing that I like to write on, that comes from the top of the page when I said make a note. It's they like ourselves were sick too. Have I done these things? And by the way, the answer is always yes. It's just how we zoom in and zoom out with the scope. So oftentimes we'll be resentful. That person stole from me. Well, have we ever stolen from others? And maybe you weren't quite like shoplifter, but maybe you stole time, money, energy, peace of mind, right? And we can narrow that scope in. Did I steal from them? Did I steal from this person that I'm resentful they stole from me? And I picked up this prompt during COVID when I started zooming around. I got it in Ontario, and it is so helpful when you're feeling really resistant or you're working with somebody who's really resistant. So we have a look at, okay, have I done these things? And when we're looking at principles or institutions, like maybe we're resentful at some institution because of its bureaucracy. And I can look at, well, have I ever made life more difficult to others? Have I ever had rules that I made for myself and made for others and expected other people to follow? Have I ever been frustrating? And it just helps us to begin to soften it. So have we done those things? The next prompt is, where did I make a decision based on self which later put me in a position to be hurt? Now that prompt comes from page 62. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably, which means always, pretty well always, find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So where did I make a decision based on self which later placed us in a position to be hurt? Now, I'm looking at the time. I'm probably not going to have time to do that today. But what we will do next week before we dive into fears is we're going to go back to that example and we're going to figure out where that person had made decisions based on self which later put them in a position to be hurt. And then we want to look at, where was I selfish? So some examples of selfish could be, where have I been controlling? Where did I have unfair or unreasonable or uncommunicated expectations? Where was I only thinking about me and what I could get? Where was I, showing up with that better than ego? I thought I was better than others. Trying to make things to go my way. Then we look at dishonest. Where was I dishonest? And there always is dishonesty. Bear with me. That dishonesty can look like stealing. It could look like outright lying, but it can also look like manipulating. It can look like not communicating, not setting boundaries, having walls and masks. When I look at self-seeking, I can look at my codependency. I can look at seeking my sense of value, worth, esteem, comfort, affection. I can looking at things like judging others, criticizing others. Gossip can fit in self-seeking. It can also fit in dishonest. And I look at, where was I afraid? I look at the fears that were driving this. And then when we get into the next section, which is fears, what we're going to do is we're going to use all of the fears that we found in our resentments and take them through the fear columns and begin to get freedom from them. So what we'll do next week is we'll go through the example that's given and kind of do the decisions based on self, and I'll offer some more examples of things we can put in the fourth column, and then we'll get into fears. So that's it for me.